civilian casualties considerably higher, particularly if you bear in view that in Mariupol alone, according to the civilian authorities there, 1,500 people have been killed just in that city alone, which is by a long way not the biggest city in Ukraine, although it has seen the heaviest bombardments. Civilian casualties are inevitably much higher than the military ones at this stage. We're getting a sense now of what impact this is having on the Ukrainian armed forces. And at this stage, it has to be said that there's got plenty of reserves to keep this going. If their losses are just 1,500, high enough, that's to be said. But at this stage, they can cope with that.
And as you say, it's early days, and all those tracking those fatalities in those circumstances is quite challenging. Now, moving to diplomacy, you've seen diplomatic efforts to bring an end to this conflict. For example, last week with the state of both Germany and France have returned to that project. They've been speaking to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron have been banging their heads against this Russian door for quite a long time now without getting anywhere. Same again today, no progress really. They say that he's not ready at this stage to contemplate a ceasefire, although it has to be said Vladimir Putin did say that he had seen some signs of progress in negotiations that the Russian side says are still going on between the Ukrainian and the Russian sides. Remember those negotiations started at that small town on the Belarusian-Ukrainian border. Apparently they're now continuing, but in video link. Some progress, but clearly not enough to persuade Vladimir Putin to stop the military operations. I don't think that's going anywhere at this stage. The Ukrainians are saying, if there's going to be, if there are going to be real negotiations, first of all there has to be a ceasefire. President Zelensky has suggested a possible venue in Jerusalem, but there's no sign that the Israelis have picked up on that yet, and certainly the Russians haven't.
Okay, thank you very much for those updates. Rob Parsons from our International Affairs Desk on the situation in Ukraine. Now, with millions of people fleeing the conflict there, EU representatives are trying to set up a so-called green corridor to allow refugees to leave through the Moldova and access other European nations. Moldova, Ukraine's southern neighbour, has already taken in 100,000 people, a significant number given its 2.5 million population. For more on the situation at the Polish border, we've been speaking to Magdalena Hodownik. Here's more from her.
Right in front of the so-called reception point. This is where Ukrainian and other nationalities from Ukraine arriving directly from Ukraine by train. And they are constantly moved towards bigger cities in Poland, but the situation on the border in Poland is getting quite complicated. Yesterday, the mayor of Warsaw, the capital city of Poland, said that new arrivals, the people who arrive from Ukraine, makes around 10% of the Warsaw population. So we can see that even if here at the border the situation is quite calm because all the arriving people are transferred quite fast. These tourists from bigger cities for in Poland is complicated. So yes, the NGOs, local community leaders, politicians, they called Europe to help refugees, to relocate them, and to think that taking into account that there are more refugees from Ukraine because they are still arriving, thousands of them every single day. We need help from other countries, so we are preparing for that as well.
When it comes to applying financial pressure to bring an end to the war, the United States and the European Union continue to distance themselves from Russia as they seek to squeeze its economy. This comes in the form of a new round of sanctions on imports and exports, while they're also aiming to wean themselves off Russian fossil fuels. And the conflict in Ukraine could now even have repercussions beyond our own planet, as the head of Russian space agency Roscosmos has warned that the International Space Station could come crashing down to Earth. He claims they might stop sending spacecraft that keep the station in orbit because of sanctions against Russia. Peter O'Brien explains.
This video, released by the Russian space agency Roscosmos, shows the Russian segment of the International Space Station detaching, leaving the station at the mercy of the Earth's gravitational pull. The head of Roscosmos says the West is risking this happening and says the ISS's orbit means it wouldn't fall on Russia, but somewhere else. Who might the 500-ton International Space Station crashed down on. The population of other countries, including those led by gods of war, should think about the price of sanctions they initiated against Roscosmos. Is this an idle threat or a serious concern? Russia is responsible for keeping the ISS afloat, and it's true that if it fell to Earth, not all of it would burn up in the atmosphere. But Russia's also responsible for boosting the ISS out of the way its space station. If it stops cooperating, it could be putting the lives of 3 of its cosmonauts who are on board in danger. In any case, companies like Northrop Grumman and SpaceX are stepping in to make sure the ISS remains in orbit and movable. For NASA, the risk isn't a sudden plummet to Earth, but a sad loss of international scientific collaboration.
It would be very difficult for us to be operating on our own. The ISS is an international partnership that was created as an international partnership with joint dependencies, which is what makes it such an amazing program.
The ISS is scheduled for controlled decommission by 2031, when it will meet a watery grave in the Pacific Ocean.
Well, that's all for this bulletin. There's more news coming up on France 24 in just a moment. That was music from a concert that took place in Paris this week in solidarity with Ukraine. One of the artists taking part was the renowned Franco-Georgian pianist Katia Buniatishvili. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. Now, Katia, what was it like to perform with so many different artists in this context?
It feels somehow weird that there are kids and women and men in Ukraine suffering during every day, and you cannot do anything about it, and you're doing a concert in purpose to somehow mobilize something or financially help or to spread a message that the war should stop. It's a necessity, but at the same time there's a contrast in what you're feeling and being dressed, being on stage. But I guess the motivation of all these artists was there. They were mentally and physically there to encourage to do something for them, and we wanted just to collect some money for people who are in need right now.
Is that the best way, do you think, for an artist to protest at a time like this, to perform?
No, I don't think so. I think that best way for a human being is to find a way to protest it somehow, and with different professions, journalists do their thing, musicians do their thing, but at the end it depends on human being, what you want to say, what you have to do, what you want to do, and how much can you do in this situation. I think the message we had during this evening was that it's not about choosing the sides, where is the bad side, where is the good side. It's more about we're against the war and it has to stop as soon as possible, because it's 21st century, and I think diplomacy should be the way to negotiate things, and if it doesn't happen, it means that there is no achievement, no progress in politics, and we're stuck in a history which gave us a lesson that we shouldn't do war anymore, but somehow we didn't manage to make some progress and be simply human beings who have a dialogue and can find a solution without the war.
You yourself have taken some action there. You stopped performing in Russia in 2008. Tell us about your reasons for that.
There was a war in Georgia in 2008, and despite my love for Russian culture and Russian people and this country and this language, my connection with this country, I decided not to perform there anymore. I refused every invitation, because as a human being, as a citizen of Georgia, first of all, but also as a human being, I wanted to protest the aggression, and At that time, I was not among many of the artists who did that because they didn't want to make political statements, and of course I understood them, but I thought that it was not a political statement. It was more about action against the aggression, you know, peaceful reaction against the aggression, and well, the intuition that it might go farther, and it's not only about the Georgian territory, but it could also, you know, happen somewhere else on a bigger territory as Ukraine is. The fear and the intuition that it might happen one day was there, and unfortunately it happened, hoping that it will not happen anymore, but it happened. So sometimes protest doesn't bring much, but probably it's important to not to forget about the consciousness of our acts as a human being, as an artist, but most importantly as a human being.
Georgia and Ukraine's efforts to have closer ties with the West have been something that's angered Russia for a long time. Both countries are applying for EU membership. Do you think that's going to make tensions worse?
Well, I hope that not, but I guess it can somehow bring not such a positive reactions from our big neighbor. But I think that we want Europe and European countries in the Western civilization. I think that human rights are better protected. Human beings can be more free and creative in those countries. That's the reason why they want to be part of this civilization. Also, we are part of this civilization because during centuries we were part of this civilization. But it might have unpleasant consequences, apparently, yes.
Katia, you were born in Georgia. The director of the fashion house Balenciaga, Demna Gubaev, was also born in Georgia. At the start of his show at Paris Fashion Week, he paid tribute to Ukrainians fleeing the country. Models walked down the catwalk through some fake snow, carrying big sacks with their possessions in them. He said on Instagram, "The war in Ukraine has triggered the pain of a past trauma I have carried in me since 1993, when the same thing happened in my home country. When he was 12, he was one of 250,000 Georgians forced from their homes by Abkhazian separatists during Georgia's civil war, crossing the Caucasus Mountains with his family." Now, you were very young during that civil war, only 6, I think. What memories do you have of that time?
Well, my parents protected us. They didn't want to show us what happens outside our apartment. Of course, we were living in a poverty as most of the population at that time, and we were kids who had, not such a good conditions to live. That's it. But they really tried to cover all this situation, what was happening in Georgia at that time, with arts, with creativity, and not to give us time to think about what's going on outside. Also, we didn't have much connection with the outside world because mostly we were in the books and with music and school and parents. That was it. They protected us as they could with 100%. But I think the traumas are always there for kids. You cannot just take it away. You can still smell the fear. You can still smell the of not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. You know, this kind of not knowing and not being secure in your atmosphere. Children, they feel it, and that's the trauma also of today's kids in Ukraine, I guess, and it makes maybe a person more strong, but at the same time you have some kind of pain in yourself that you always wear with yourself, and you have the view on life with this pain, I guess. And I do not wish this for other children, for new generations, and I was hoping that the 21st century was an interesting century of information where we have access to all informations, which sometimes brings some indifference as well, unfortunately, because when you get too much information, then you become also indifferent to certain things. But I was hoping at least that it was a century of discussion, of diplomacy, of negotiation with words, not with arms. But we're disappointed, all of us.
The cultural world has been affected. There have been many protests in the cultural world. The principal conductor and musical director of the Bolshoi Theatre in Moscow is stepping down. Tugan Sokiev was appointed in 2014. And some Russian artists are being cancelled, such as the Bolshoi Ballet's residency at London's Royal Opera. Not everyone agrees with this reaction, though. Berlin-based star conductor Daniel Barenboim, whose grandparents were of Ukrainian descent, warned against condemning Russian culture for President Putin's politics. Have a listen.
Russian culture is not the same as Russian politics. We must condemn politics loud and clear and distance ourselves from it unequivocally. But we must not allow a witch hunt against Russian people and culture.
Katya, do you think that politics and culture can be separated in a conflict like this?
Until the war is still here, no. Because first objective view about is that what do we want? We want to stop the war, right? Right now they're shooting people, they're shooting children, women, men. And after when the war stops, after that, of course, I would never point on Russian musicians that we're pro the war, pro-war, or pro-aggression, or pro-propaganda. I wouldn't point, of course, and I think that we shouldn't judge people. I don't like to judge people after the war. But during the war, what we should think about is how can we stop the war?
You spoke a little bit about how art and culture helped you when you were younger and you fled your country. I want to take a listen to some of your music. This is you playing a composition by the French composer and pianist Erik Satie. Let's have a listen. From your album Labyrinth. What music do you turn to in difficult moments of your life?
Very different. I don't have one composer. Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms. Not easy to choose. Rachmaninoff.
Katya, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to play out with the Ukrainian national anthem that you performed last week with Paris's Chamber Music Orchestra. You're also going to be performing in Paris at the Philharmonie on the 23rd and 24th of March. Remember our website, also on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.
Germany has one of the highest rates of domestic abuse killings in Europe, a situation that got worse during the COVID lockdown.
Ich bin fassungslos, sprachlos, stehe noch völlig neben mir. Ich will und kann es nicht wahrhaben. Wie konntest du so brutal sein? Du hättest mir fast mein Leben genommen.
Media coverage of homicide in the country regularly sensationalizes and romanticizes the killings, while the courts were often lenient on perpetrators.
Niemand kann in einem solchen Fall Tat auslösen und hat bestimmt auch Gefühle der Verzweiflung und deren Ausweglosigkeit verhängt.
Watch reporters on France 24 and France24.com. Some of the world's most influential people talk to France 24.
Governments cannot do much promotion of human value.
Politicians.
E acho que sem política, uma democracia.
Scientists, athletes and artists. Get all the insight.
The government is just spying.
And the voices that matter on France 24.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
France 24 for the last stretch of the presidential race, the mother of all elections, the presidential election. This is the time for the French to choose their president. We'll have all our special envoys on the campaign trail across the globe, the latest analysis, the best polls. Join us here on France 24.
France 2022, the campaign, on France 24 and France24.com.
Forces pound the city of Kharkiv and destroy a mosque in Mariupol, with dozens feared dead inside. Meanwhile, fighting rages around the capital amid fears that Kyiv is the next major military target. Joe Biden restates that American forces will not directly intervene in Ukraine, but the US and its NATO and EU allies announced new sanctions to further isolate Russia and punish its economy. Millions of people have now crossed Ukraine's borders in search of safety in neighbouring countries, braving freezing temperatures and overcrowded facilities. This as the EU tries to implement safe corridors to allow those refugees to access other European nations. Welcome back to the newsroom here at France 24. I'm More than 2 weeks into the conflict now, and the seven-port city of Mariupol has had to bear the bulk of the suffering from Russia's war in Ukraine. Now a mosque in the city centre has been bombed, with dozens feared dead. The humanitarian situation across the city, water and heat.
The sun rises over Kyiv to the sound of explosions. It's another day of Russia's assault on Ukraine as its forces continue their slow and methodical advance on the capital. In the suburbs, fighting intensified, like here in Moshun. Satellite images showed multiple homes on fire. Russian shelling caused widespread damage here. Residents continue to pour out of the city, fearing their homes could be next. Speaking in an interview with France 24, the mayor of Kyiv said the Ukrainian army is putting up stiff resistance.
Our Ukrainian soldiers destroyed the plans of Russians, and we're very proud to have very tough soldiers who defend our houses.
Elsewhere across Ukraine, several cities, including Cherniv and Mykolaiv, are also under heavy bombardment. In the southeastern port city of Mariupol, Ukraine's foreign ministry say a mosque was targeted by Russian forces.
The mosque of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent and his wife Roxolana in Mariupol was shelled by Russian invaders. More than 80 adults and children are hiding there from the shelling, including citizens of Turkey.
Elsewhere in the city, the situation remains dire. For days, people haven't had access to the internet or electricity. They are running out of food and have to queue for water. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia is to blame for the worsening humanitarian crisis.
Mariupol remains blocked by the enemy. Russian troops did not let our aid into the city and continue to torture our people.
The number of evacuees from Ukraine fell Friday compared to previous days. Authorities say just over 7,000 people from 4 cities managed to flee.
Well, for more analysis of the situation in Ukraine, I'm now joined by Jean-Paul Palomeras, former Supreme Commander of NATO Allied Forces. Mr. Palomeras, thanks very much for joining us today. Now, looking at the most recent developments when it comes to the Russian military movement, specifically the changes they've made, redeployments, etc., are we getting a clearer idea of Moscow's strategy?
Well, I think we are getting a clearer idea now. Obviously, their aim, they are taking the benefit of the mass, if I may say so. And so their aim is to fix, in a certain way, the Ukrainian forces where they are. So the Ukrainians to defend cities, strategic interest points like power plant, etc., etc. They are using themselves in a certain way, and in addition, they cannot move to support another area where they are short of supply, if I may say. So this is a long-term effect that the Russians want to provoke, and hoping that at the end the Ukrainian forces will fall like dominoes, if I may say so, and at once, which can happen. We don't know how long the Ukrainian forces will be able to resist against this kind of strategy.
Now, we heard that Vladimir Putin gave the green light to volunteers who want to go to the front, and we've also heard reports of foreign mercenaries getting involved in this war. Could you tell us a bit more about the international dimension of this conflict and what it means for the war?
Well, we know that Putin will use absolutely every possibility, every tool, every people who is eager to fight. You know, these people coming from Syria, from Chechnya, those are fighters. They don't know anything else than to fight. So, and they are brutal for sure, and they don't care at all for the Ukrainian, which could be different for the Russian.
And do you see this as a sign that the Russian military operation is weakened to the point where it can't conduct the operation alone?
Well, I think the question is about the conscripts. You know, there are a lot of conscripts in the Russian army, and so and Putin say that there was no conscripts, and we have to prove that some conscripts were involved. And conscripts is a difficult question, because when they come back and when they are dead, then they come back to the corpse, come back to their family. And suddenly the families discover that it is not a friendly peacekeeping operation, that it is war.
Mr. Jean-Paul Palomares there, thank you very much, commenting on the military dimension of developments in Ukraine. Well, for more updates from the war in Ukraine, I'm joined on set now by our international affairs editor, Rob Parsons. Hello, Rob. Now, we've seen, to make a shift from the military strategy to the situation on the ground now, we've seen some very harrowing images on our screens of the consequences of the bombings. Now we're getting a clearer idea of the actual human toll in Ukraine, with new statistics released.
Well, new statistics in particular on military losses, because the Ukrainians have been issuing their figures on the Russian military losses. They're claiming somewhere in the region of 12,000 Russian soldiers killed. That's a figure that the Russians are disputing. It's some time since they've issued a figure of their own, but about a week ago or so they said they had lost about 500. The Western estimate is about 6,000 Russian soldiers have been killed. The Ukrainians are saying now that they have lost 1,300 soldiers, there or thereabouts, which seems to sound about right. Obviously, civilian casualties considerably higher, particularly if you bear in view that in Mariupol alone, according to the civilian authorities there, 1,500 people have been killed just in that city alone, which is by a long way not the biggest city in Ukraine, although it has seen the heaviest bombardment. So civilian casualties will inevitably be much higher than the military ones at this stage. But we're getting a sense now of what impact this is having on the Ukrainian armed forces. And at this stage, it has to be said that they've got plenty of reserves to keep this going. If their losses are just 1,500, high enough, it has to be said. But at this stage, they can cope with that.
And as you say, it's every day from tracking those fatalities in the current circumstances is quite challenging. Now, moving to diplomacy, we've seen diplomatic efforts to bring an end to this conflict, for example, from Turkey last week, with very little result there. Now the heads of state of both Germany and France have returned to that project. They've been speaking to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, Olaf Scholz and Emmanuel Macron have been banging their heads against this Russian door for quite a long time now without getting anywhere. Same again today, no progress. You're saying that he's not ready at this stage to contemplate a ceasefire. But again, as we said, Vladimir Putin did say that he had seen some signs of progress in negotiations that the Russian side says are still going on between the Ukrainian and the Russian sides. Remember, those negotiations started at that small town on the Belarusian-Ukrainian border. Apparently they're now continuing, but in video link. Some progress, but clearly not enough to persuade Vladimir Putin to stop the military operations. I don't think that's going anywhere at this stage. The Ukrainians are saying if there are going to be real negotiations, first of all there has to be a ceasefire. President Zelensky has suggested a possible venue, Jerusalem. That the Israelis have picked up on that yet, and certainly the Russians haven't.
Okay, thank you very much for those updates. Rob Parsons there from our International Affairs desk on the situation in Ukraine. Now, with millions of people fleeing the conflict there, EU representatives are trying to set up a so-called green corridor to allow refugees to leave through Romania by bus and access other European nations. Moldova, Ukraine's southern neighbour, has already taken in 100,000 people, a significant number given its 2.5 million population. Well, for more on the situation at the Polish border, we've been speaking to Magdalena Hodownik. Here's more from her.
I'm right in front of the so-called reception point. This is where Ukrainians and other nationalities from Ukraine arriving directly from Ukraine by train. And they are quite fastly moved towards bigger cities in Poland. But the situation in Poland is getting quite complicated. Yesterday, the mayor of Warsaw, the capital city of Poland, said that new arrivals, the people who arrived from Ukraine, makes around 10% of the Warsaw population. So we can see that even if here at the border the situation is quite calm because all the arriving people are transferred quite fast. The situation in bigger cities further in Poland is complicated. So yes, the NGOs, local communities, as well as politicians, they called Europe to take refugees, to relocate them, and to think that, taking into account that Poland will take more refugees from Ukraine because they are still arriving, thousands of them every single day, we will need help from other countries. So we are preparing for that as well.
When it comes to applying financial pressure to bring an end to the war, the United States and the European Union continue to distance themselves from Russia as they seek to squeeze its economy. This comes in the form of a new round of sanctions on imports and exports, while they're also aiming to wean themselves off Russian fossil fuels. And the conflict in Ukraine could now even have repercussions beyond our own planet, as the head of Russian space agency Roscosmos has warned that the International Space Station could come crashing down to Earth. He claims they might stop sending spacecraft that keep the station in orbit because of sanctions against Russia. Peter O'Brien explains.
This video, released by the Russian space agency Roscosmos, shows the Russian segment of the International Space Station detaching, leaving the station at the mercy of the Earth's gravitational pull. The head of Roscosmos says the West is risking this happening and says the ISS's orbit means it wouldn't fall on Russia, but somewhere else.
Who might the 500-ton International Space Station crash down on? The population of other countries, including those led by dogs of war, should think about the price of sanctions they initiated against Roscosmos.
Is this an idle threat or a serious concern? Russia is responsible for keeping the ISS afloat, and it's true that if it fell to Earth, not all of it would burn up in the atmosphere. But Russia's also responsible for boosting the ISS out of the way of space debris.
Would you lower it a little bit?
If it stops cooperating, it could be putting the lives of 3 of its cosmonauts who are on board in danger. In any case, companies like Northrop Grumman and SpaceX are stepping in to make sure the ISS remains in orbit and maneuverable. For NASA, the risk isn't a sudden plummet to Earth, but a sad loss of international scientific collaboration.
It would be very difficult for us to be operating on our own. The ISS is an international partnership that was created as an international partnership with joint dependencies, which is what makes it such an amazing program.
The ISS is scheduled for controlled decommission by 2031, when it will meet a watery grave in the Pacific Ocean.
Well, that's all for this bulletin. There's more news coming up on Fast 24.
This is the time for the French to choose their president. They have polled special envoys on the campaign trail across the globe, the latest analysis, the best polls. Join us here on France 24.
France 2022, the campaign on France 24 and France24.com.
Challenges of managing an economy during a war. Natalie, thank you for being with us. You were in office at a time when Ukraine was fighting a war in the eastern Donbass region. Obviously today's situation is very different, but could you give us an idea of the sort of financial strain the government is under?
Absolutely. When I was finance minister in 2014, first of all, it was a terrible shock. In this case, it's slightly different because we've been preparing for it, unfortunately, with knowledge. In 2014, when I was finance minister, the country was on a financial abyss. We had no reserves in the central bank to defend the currency. We had no money in the treasury to pay our bills. And we had no military because the former president had basically destroyed it. Today, Ukraine is starting from a much better position, having worked the last 8 years, notwithstanding war, to build reserves in the central bank, to defend the currency, and to build a budget and a tax system. But that said, the situation today is so much worse. If in 2014, 20% of GDP was knocked out and 7% of our territory because of the illegal invasion of Crimea and Donbass, today the whole country is under attack. Entire cities are being bombed to the ground. Entire airports, waters, and ports have been blocked. It's an economic strangulation of the country. So the situation is much more dire and much more severe than anything that we lived through over the last 8 years of war in the East and with the illegal invasion and occupation and annexation of Crimea.
What does a war do to